This week, an interreligious gathering looks at marriage and family. Pope Francis confirms his travel plans, and we find out why this pope is shaking up so many things and people. Hello and welcome to this edition of Vatican Connections. In his nearly 2 years as Pope, Pope Francis has shaken things up quite a bit, and we're going to find out just why coming up. But first, the top Vatican story these days, at least for the North American Church, is that Pope Francis will attend the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia next November. He made the announcement at the end of his address to participants of an interreligious conference on the complementarity of man and woman. Archbishop Charles Chaput of Philadelphia was one of those participants. CNS has more on his reaction.
Mi piace confermare che a Dio piacendo, nel settembre del 2015, mi recherò in Filadelfia. Per l'8º incontro mondiale delle famiglie.
You know, the people have asked me if this was a surprise, and in itself it wasn't, because the Holy Father has said that he's going to be coming to Philadelphia for quite a few months. He's been telling me that personally. But for him to announce officially that he's coming so early is really quite an unusual thing. So it's going to re-energize our efforts. There's a lot of enthusiasm already, but I think 90% of the enthusiasm is based on the fact that the Holy Father will be with us. And now that he said that, I expect that there'll be even a double amount of enthusiasm as there is already. And I'm very happy about that.
So Philadelphia is now officially in full-on papal trip planning mode. There's no word yet on whether the Pope will make any other stops during his visit to the United States. Meanwhile, at the Humanum conference on the complementarity of man and woman, participants heard about the value and the teaching of marriage from different religious groups. The former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth spoke about the development of the concept of marriage, why humans are wired towards committed lifelong partnerships, and of course, Jewish thought on marriage.
And really remarkable in the Hebrew Bible was the idea that love, not just fairness, is the driving principle of the moral life. 3 loves. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Love your neighbor as yourself. And 36 times repeated in one way or another in the Mosaic books, love the stranger because you know what it feels like to be a stranger. Now, put it another way, just as God created the universe in love and forgiveness, he asks us to create our universe, the social universe, in love and forgiveness. And that love is the flame lit in marriage and the family, so that morality is the love between husband and wife, parent and child, extended outward towards the world.
He went on to discuss the present reality for families. He said the one thing families and marriages are starving for is time, and he pointed to the Sabbath as one way to give families the thing they need most. Now, before the start of that colloquium, CNS spoke to Sister Mary Prudence Allen about that meeting and her intervention.
Next week there's going to be this Humanum conference in Rome, sponsored by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, at which leaders of all various religions, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, Catholic, are coming together to talk and share with each other their witness to the marriage of a woman and man and a family. So we'll be exposed to a variety of ways that the man-woman marriage, children, has manifested itself in the world today. You could look around and see that marriages and families have always, or for the most part, been a man and a woman from the beginning of time. There have always been some exceptions. There always will be some exceptions. That's not a problem. The only problem is when the exception starts to want to demand to be the rule. That's the problem. It's very serious, I think. And I think a lot of people don't have confidence in the fact that being a man and a woman is really the way that marriage should be lived. Every person has to bear witness to the truth of the faith in their normal married life, in their average married life, day in, day out. Everyone's called to be a witness to the truth, because the truth is being contradicted in the media daily. And it's going to be difficult for a lot of people, because there's very strong cultural forces, and it makes a lot of people afraid, I think. But they have to be confident and just go forth and bear witness to the truth.
Immediately after Pope Francis was elected, a flood of books hit the market, most autobiographies or biographies. But they all told the same story: a young man of Italian origin growing up in Buenos Aires with the same hopes, dreams, and interests as every other Argentine youth, his unexpected calling to the priesthood, and his life as a Jesuit. Now, to one writer, there seemed to be a piece of the puzzle missing. Austen Ivereigh set out to show the non-Argentine world just who is Jorge Bergoglio, and most importantly, what makes him the man we know today. Salt and Light spoke to Austen Ivereigh recently about his new book.
20 years ago, I lived in Argentina for 2 years, if I add up all my different visits, when I was preparing my doctoral thesis on the church in Argentina and politics. And so I immersed myself in the whole kind of pre-conciliar world of Catholic nationalism and Peronism and all that very complex history, the Jesuits of the 18th century. So of course, when Francis came out on the balcony, in fact in the weeks afterwards, I was of course fascinated. Where does he fit into all these issues, which I knew were very complex, the dictatorship of the 70s, the rise of Peronism, and all the rest of it. And I kind of waited for a book that would delve into that stuff, and I didn't find one. None came out, and so I just decided to do it myself. So last year I went back to Argentina. I was there for about 5 weeks. I did about 80 interviews, spoke to many, many Jesuits, traveled around a lot to Santa Fe, Cordoba, as well as Buenos Aires, Santiago in Chile, which is where he did his juniorate. And it was an extraordinary journey for me, not only into his life, but also in a way back into my own past, because this was 25 years ago, I read so much about this. So it was an extraordinary time.
As any Argentine will tell you, none of what Pope Francis is doing is new or shocking. He has brought all of himself and his country to the Vatican.
He is a master at building personal relationships of trust. And so in Argentina, they say actually he was in a way the greatest political kind of mind since Perón. Now, I mean, just a quick, chapter on a quick parenthesis on Perón, of course, who transformed the Argentine political landscape. His genius was to have a kind of contact with ordinary people, to understand them, to be able to read them and articulate their hopes and their dreams. He has the same. Now, what I show in the book is that as a young Jesuit, he developed this beautiful theology, which was partly from the council, the people of God, but he created this phrase, which is very much his, in Italian, il santo popolo fedele di Dio, santo pueblo fiel de Dios, that God's holy faithful people. So he actually sees the church in a way a bit like a nation that has been formed, and is really the primary people in this are the poor, the ordinary people, not the elites. So he's actually from the very beginning, and in this he's a lot like Perón, he opposes himself, or he takes a stance which is actually neither right nor left, in a way opposed to ideology. But of course what's central for Jorge Bergoglio is the gospel, it's Jesus Christ. So that's I would say, that's what's come to Rome, and that's what's confusing people. People go, is he on the left, is he on the right, is he liberal, is he conservative? Actually he's outside this thing. Here's the other way in which Argentina's come to Rome. What I show in the book, and this was a real revelation for me, is how Evangelii Nunciandi, the great document of Paul VI, which for Bergoglio, for Francis, is the greatest papal document ever written, actually was deeply influenced by an Argentine version of liberation theology called Teología del Pueblo, which is really committed to the whole basics of liberation theology, the option for the poor, but it's anti-Marxist. So it comes out of that Catholic nationalist, if you like, tradition in Argentina, which is very opposed to liberalism and Marxism. That's a part of liberation theology which really doesn't get a look in the wider world. We always assume that liberation theology is, if you like, the more Marxist version. But it triumphs actually through, as I show, through Cardinal Peroni and so on. It's very influential on Paul VI. That's what triumphs in Evangelii Nuntiandi. And that's what triumphs at Aparecida. Now, Aparecida, 2007, was a key moment for the Latin American church, but it was also a key moment for the Argentines, because actually all those beautiful passages on popular religiosity really come from the Argentines who were drafting that. So the story, and that's what's now arrived in Rome, and of course in his document Evangelii Gaudium, which is kind of Aparecida now applied to the universal church. So it's Argentina that's come to Rome, I would say, in those two ways.
The now famous Aparecida document, drafted in 2007 by the bishops of Latin America, is not only the blueprint for Pope Francis's pontificate, but a sign of something much more significant.
That Latin America had a very strong sense of itself as a church, and Selam and Aparecida was a great expression of that. But it was ignored by the rest of the world because I think it was seen as a Latin American way of viewing the world and a way of viewing the church. But what comes across in my book is that it was heavily supported by Pope Benedict. Benedict, and this is really interesting, saw the Latin American church taking its place as the source for the universal church in a way that Europe, of course, had been for centuries. So really the dynamic in the later chapters of the book is Europe is the European church in a way is in crisis. The Vatican is in crisis because the European church is in desolation. And there's this other church which is emerging from Latin America, which Benedict discerns as taking it. So he encourages Aparecida. And then the story really after Aparecida from 2007 onwards is in a way the Latin American church then taking its place. And the election of Bergoglio, therefore, is not just the election of a man, it's the election of a program.
Even though Ivereigh claims the cardinals knew what they were doing when they elected Cardinal Bergoglio Pope, some might be having buyer's remorse.
I think there is a degree of chaos now in the Francis papacy. And I think the chaos comes from that putting the person first and the human being first. And also because he is actually shaking things up. He's moving the church. I mean, Cardinal Schönborn put it very beautifully here at the Synod when he said, actually, he's calling us to a pastoral conversion. Now, the church has to convert. The church has to become better at coming alongside people. And in order to break the church, if you like, out of the model that's built for clarity, that was built for clarity, to a new model which is built for mission and built for accompaniment, there's going to be pain. It's going to be chaos, and a lot of people are going to get upset. They are already upset. I think they're angry at him because, let's just be frank about this, some people have made Catholicism into an ideology, you know, just as the Pharisees did. It's what good people often end up doing with religion. It becomes a place of sanctuary. You know, one of the most moving things I found when I was looking at him, particularly in the stage just before he left for Rome for the conclave, he gave some extraordinary retreats to Caritas. And he first used that image, which he famously used in the speech to the cardinals before the conclave, about, you know what our problem is? We have Jesus tied up in the sacristy, and we need to let him out. You know, it's not about Jesus knocking to be let in, it's about us keeping him in. And I think that's the big shift that's taking place now. And I think it's a disturbing, exciting, disconcerting period in the church. But I think, and that's why I think I'm justified in calling him a great reformer in the tradition of Gregory the Great and Leo and Francis of Assisi, because I think the next few papacies, whatever happens now, are going to be, to some extent, shaped by this one.
That was Austen Ivereigh. He's the author of The Great Reformer, Francis and the Making of a Radical Pope, which is now available in North America. Ivereigh is also the co-founder of Catholic Voices, a group of young Catholics in the UK who are trained to be able to talk about church teaching in the toughest of media settings. Time now to take a look at what the Pope did this week. Pope Francis gave the opening address to participants from different religions taking part in a colloquium on marriage and the complementarity of men and women. He said children have a right to grow up with a mother and a father capable of creating a suitable environment for the child's development and emotional maturity. He also said the family is in crisis, but even though society has been quick to pick up on other crises like the environmental problem, it has been very slow to pick up on this threat to the family, which is the social environment. Pope Francis also said he hopes young people will have the courage to be countercultural and look for true, lasting love, adding, "We cannot speak today of the conservative family or the progressive family. The family is the family." On Tuesday, Pope Francis met with the President of Senegal. The conversation focused on the Church's contribution to education and health care in the region, as well as efforts to help with national reconciliation. Pope Francis and President Macky Sall spoke about various other crises in the region. Wednesday was the general audience. Pope Francis focused his catechesis on holiness, saying it's easy to think that holiness is reserved for people who have the possibility of detaching themselves from ordinary daily concerns so that they can spend time exclusively in prayer. But that's not true. The Pope said holiness is a gift God offers, and it's a response to His grace, and it's the result of hundreds of small steps and gestures that are made on a daily basis. Finally, on Thursday, the Holy Father visited the headquarters of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization for a conference known as Better Nutrition, Better Lives. In his speech, he said the right to food can only be ensured if we care about the actual subject, that is, the person who suffers from hunger and malnutrition. However, he said the fight against hunger is often hindered by the pressures of market priorities. Now, he drew applause when he added that while we speak of new rights for people, the hungry remain at the street corner and ask to be recognized as citizens, to receive a healthy diet. He said, "We ask for dignity, not for charity." According to Pope Francis, there are two challenges to overcome in order to fight hunger. The first, he said, is how easily the issue of hunger is manipulated by data, by the demands of national security, corruption, and the lamentation of economic crisis. The second challenge is a lack of solidarity. He said, "We suspect subconsciously that we would like to remove this word from the dictionary." Pope Francis said the Church offers her contribution through constant attention to the life of the poor in all parts of the world, and is also involved in international groups via doctrine and statements. This was the second international conference on nutrition. Pope John Paul II addressed the first conference in 1992. This week, our Roman Profile offers us a look at a little piece of Canada in Rome, the Canadian Pontifical College. Father Eric Sylvester, the rector of the college, sat down with Salt and Light to look back over its history. Pontifical Canadian College was founded in 1888, but the idea came earlier when English Cardinal Edward Henry Howard asked the Sulpician Superior General, "Why doesn't Canada have a college when other countries, even poorer countries, do?" And so the Canadian province of the Sulpicians founded the college. It's no small feat considering at the time, Canada was still a mission territory. Since then, the college has grown and moved house several times, but has remained a Canadian presence in Rome. Is it still necessary after all these years?
Direi che è ancora più pertinente oggi che prima, perché la situazione della nostra Chiesa, che è ancora presente e abbastanza viva in diverse parti del Paese, per carità, però la nostra Chiesa penso che ha bisogno del supporto dei fratelli e sorelle del mondo intero. E andare a studiare a Roma e di pensare, di capire, di vedere, di realizzare che la Chiesa è prima di tutto cattolica, prima di essere canadese, americana, francese, no? Italiana, è una Chiesa universale. E andare nelle università romane è giustamente per vivere nel quotidiano questa realtà, di parlare con gli studenti del mondo intero, di capire la loro realtà, di capire come il cristianesimo trasforma il mondo. e poi di vivere a prossimità del Santo Padre. I nostri studenti in 10 minuti sono ora su Piazza San Pietro. Bellissimo, no?
Besides the chance to live steps away from the Holy Father, the college offers a true community experience with everything a studying priest needs. The chapel, built to reflect a North American aesthetic, serves as the main gathering point. There are accommodations for about 20 residents. The college also offers its own library, which is a convenient place to study and research, but also a treasure trove, housing the history of the college. A history, Father Eric Sylvester says, is too precious to lose.
È di storia del secolo passato, le guerre, tutto che ha colpito in un modo incredibile l'Europa e la città eterna. Non dobbiamo dimenticare che uno dei grandi rettori, sino il più grande degli storia, è stato il Cardinale Léger. Perché grande rettore? Perché lui ha dovuto resuscitare quasi l'opera del collegio che era morta durante la guerra. In 1948 Léger arriva a Roma e va a ridare un soffio all'istituzione. E anche, e questa è la cosa bellissima per l'istituzione, è di dare una dimensione caritatevole all'opera di rifondazione, direi. Tanto che l'opera Léger, che esiste ancora oggi, è stata fondata a Roma quando Léger era rettore, la Croce d'Oro, una opera per dare il cibo e assistenza ai numerosi italiani che non avevano più niente da mangiare dopo la guerra.
Cardinal Léger was not the only eminent Canadian cleric to spend time at the college. Cardinal Edouard Gagnon served as rector from 1972 to 1979, and at the same time was the president of the Pontifical Committee on the Family and a member of the Central Committee preparing celebrations for the Holy Year of 1975. His desk and zucchetto are kept at the Canadian College as a way of remembering the Canadian Church's contribution to the Universal Church and as a source of inspiration for the future of the college.
Io direi due grandi sogni. Il primo è di continuare a accogliere come un centro culturale di formazione non solo i sacerdoti, che è ovvio, è la missione principale di un'istituzione come il Collegio Canadese, però anche i pellegrini. E il secondo sogno penso che sarebbe di anche nel termine di accogliere, di formare, di offrire le possibilità a più sacerdoti che non sono necessariamente canadesi, ma che con la loro presenza aiutano i nostri propri sacerdoti canadesi a capire che la Chiesa è grande, è grande.
Vatican Connections is interactive. We answer your questions and explain things you want to know. You can reach us on Twitter at VatiConnections or by email at info@saltandlighttv.org. We'll try our best to answer your questions during this part of our show. Well, that's it for this edition of Vatican Connections. Join us again next time for another look at what's going on at the Vatican. And as always, you can follow us on Twitter or Facebook or check our blog, and you can watch us on Roku. From everyone here, thanks for watching and see you next time.